Yes, well, I think I need the mic. Welcome, everyone. We are really delighted to have you. And the first thing I will say is don't forget that after we hear from these distinguished gentlemen, we have refreshments and an exhibit of some wonderful memorabilia about Mike Joseph in the cafeteria. So we hope you will stay and join us, and certainly feel free to tour the museums. I just want to say a few things. First of all, that the starting point for getting this event going was Carl contacting us about the possibility of, we have a Cortland County Hall of Fame in the Homeville Museum, and we have incredible folks that I hope you will take a look and see the wonderful people from Cortland County who have done such amazing things locally and beyond, much beyond the local area. So Carl was interested in whether we might be able to consider adding Mike to the Hall of Fame. So I told Carl, we have kind of suspended our process of taking nominations for the Hall of Fame. COVID kind of interrupted that. We'd like to get it started. And so the first thing I want to say is that we are really interested in anyone who might want to volunteer to be on a committee to consider nominations. We at the museum don't want to simply choose folks for the Hall of Fame on our own, so we're hoping to restart the process. So if you are at all interested, please see me after the event, and we're thinking that we might do nominations maybe once a year or once every 2 years. It would not be a heavy commitment, but we're interested in folks outside of the museum who might want to do that. Let me also say that since it's springtime and many of us are baseball fans, I just want to let you know that one of the new things we are so thrilled to be getting for the Homeville Museum is a wonderful collection of memorabilia on Major League Baseball legend John J. McGraw, whose statue is and tribute is in Truxton. And Bill and Sally Swisher, some of you may know them, amassed an incredible collection of memorabilia on John J. McGraw, and they have given it to us at the Homeville Museum.
Oh, that's great.
Now, it will take us a while to get it up and running. We will have a physical display, and we will also have components of the collection on a touchscreen display. So it'll be a while, but maybe a few months. So I would invite you to consider coming back sometime to see that collection. It's really amazing. And then the final thing I'll say is that a new event that we would like to have as the Homeville Museum is an event to honor women veterans. June 12th has been designated by New York State and a number of other states as Women's Veterans Recognition Day. It's not a national holiday at this point, but our state recognizes it. And on June 8th, we would like to have a special event to honor women veterans. So if anyone is a veteran or has served in the military in any capacity, we'd love your ideas. We are looking for panelists. We're going to do special exhibits. So please feel free to let me know if there's any advice you want to give or if you might want to participate in any way. So without further ado, I will turn this over, and thank you very much to Mike for our introductory slide. We have, and I know many of you know these gentlemen already, we have Erik Bitterbaum, president of SUNY Cortland. We have Jim Joseph, who is the son of Mike Joseph and a VP and Dean at Moyne College. And we have Carl Hayden, Chancellor Emeritus from the New York State Board of Regents and former chair of the SUNY Board of Trustees. So we thank them fully for coming to help us celebrate the life of Mike Joseph and to learn a bit about what SUNY Cortland has done for teachers and educators for many, many years. So I will leave the mic to you. Turn it off if you need, or show the camera.
I'm going to try it without the mic. Are we good?
Yeah.
So, Jamie, you have done an extraordinary amount of work on this, and on behalf of my family, we say a big thank you. You've done a great job. for those of you in the audience, a deep expression of gratitude. I'm not sure my father would like all this fuss about him, but thank you. This means a lot to me, to my sister, to my brother-in-law, to my wife. Mom waited until the very last minute to make a decision. Dad passed away 14 months and 2 days ago. She's not ready. She's not ready, and she said, I really feel that I should be there. Mr. Hayden means a lot to me and meant a lot to your father, but I'm not ready. And I said, Mom, that's what I'm going to say. And there's not anyone in the room that's not going to get that. Yeah. I appreciate, Jamie, the introduction. You started with my favorite title, which is Mike Joseph's son. My job today is context. And I draw your attention to a picture you can't see. It was just completed, and I just picked it up this morning. Speak of just-in-time inventory. And when I have a chance, and also Jamie did a great job taking what I'd sent to her digitally and converted it also. And actually, I think it's just as great as that professionally done framing. There's a picture of Mike Joseph at 6 years old in a small classroom in Canandaigua, New York, at the head of the class with paper in hand. I'm sure he was reading. And it was captured in the Canandaigua, it was Free Press or whatever it was. And then there's a photo, one of his proudest moments professionally. He was chosen to be on a committee to reform education. You'll see.
Good luck.
But if anybody was going to put a dent in it, it was him. And are you saying that because he was a Republican governor? Is that what you were saying? And Dad's in that picture. How did that 6-year-old son of immigrants from Syria go from that photo to that photo? I'm going to try to capture a little bit of that, and I'm going to be reading to you a little bit. So I remember when he would read, he would apologize because he liked to be, off the cuff and speak like this. But sometimes it's important that we capture the words. And probably most of you in this room read his obituary, so there's some elements from that. Many of you in the room, I believe, were at his funeral, and there were a number of eulogies. The one that I gave, I also have some snippets for that, and I'm going to read the audience as I do it, and if I'm starting to lose you, I'm going to turn it over to Carl.
And I'll finish the job.
Well, your role, I believe, is as Chancellor, and we forgot your other title, which was President of the Board of Regents, and you're the only person in history to have occupied both of those distinguished positions. Am I correct about that?
Merrill Tish just eclipsed my star.
Merrill Tish from the Tish family?
That one.
Well, let's just say that I'm sure she's brilliant. Let's just say you probably didn't have the same name recognition. And we'll make that equally as impressive.
Thank you.
Okay, so I don't think she eclipsed you. Michael Joseph Jr. was born on September 26, 1934, to Michael Joseph Sr. and Mary Abraham Joseph. He passed away peacefully on March 2nd, 14 months and 2 days ago, with his wife Maria at his side. Keeping true to his spirit and deep love for family, he asked about each one of his immediate family members just before he passed away. In the final moments of his earthly journey, Michael reminded his loved ones just how much they meant to him. My father was the proud offspring of Syrian immigrants. He never forgot the sacrifices of those who came before him. In his numerous lectures and public speaking engagements, echo of his profound perspective will be summed up with this simple phrase: we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. I'm sure you've heard him say that. Honoring the opportunities his parents were afforded as immigrants, he made the choice to show gratitude and serve his country by enlisting in the U.S. Army and as a veteran of the Korean War era. Michael Joseph was a fierce advocate for children, especially. Said I wasn't going to do that, especially the most vulnerable. He was a powerful and unrelenting voice for under-resourced rural schools in New York State. When he was awarded the Canandaigua Academy Alumni and Graduates of Distinction Award in 2001, the selection committee had this to say about my father. Quote, champion of equity in public education, preeminent leader in rural education issues, end of quote. Mr. Joseph was named executive director of the Rural Schools program at Cornell University in 1990 and immediately used this opportunity as a platform to passionately and tirelessly affect change. In 1960, just up the road from us, Mr. Joseph began his career in education as a junior-senior high school teacher in Homer Central School District, where he became the district's first department chair. In 1966, at the age of 32, he moved to Marathon Central School as a high school principal. I think he may have been the youngest at the time. At 34, he was named superintendent, or chief school officer, a position that he held for 24 years. Among his major voluntary contributions to both his profession and his community were gubernatorial appointment to the New York State Board of Real Property Services and a New York State legislative appointment to the Rural School Education Advisory Committee. It also should be noted that he served as Catholic Charities of Cortland County's chair of the board up until his 80th birthday. Those are snippets for the obituary. His eulogy. What shaped him? What drove him? How did he develop this deep purpose? What took that little 6-year-old boy in that picture on a journey 7 decades later to serve on Governor Pataki's Reform of Education Commission? Do justice. Love mercy. Walk humbly with your God. Micah 6:8.
Amen.
Amen. That was not fair. You had me at amen. My father's favorite biblical verse. Some versions of Micah 6:8 drop the word your. My father would emphasize your. He believed that everyone is entitled to their interpretation of God. Everyone has a unique relationship with their God. Who was Micah? A prophet from a small agricultural village not far from Jerusalem and not far from where his family was from, the Near East. Micah translates to Michael. And Michael Joseph Jr., my father, loved this verse and lived by it every single day. This may be why. 150,000 years ago, modern humans walked out of Africa, many of them settling in the fertile, rich Near East. 11,000 years ago, Damascus, where the Abrahams came from, the oldest continuous city on earth, was established in the Levant region, the land on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean, the Near East. For centuries, the people of the Levant region, a diverse population of Muslims, Jews, and Christians, lived in peace and harmony. This is the land of our people, the Josephs and the Abrahams. The Ottoman Empire's ruthless expansion brutally disrupted this beautiful tapestry of diversity. For 6 centuries, they confiscated crops to feed their armies, leading to mass starvation. They imposed harsh laws that included forced migration, military conscription, and yes, white slavery. Over 100 years ago, my great-grandfather fell victim to the Ottoman genocide. And then the Ottomans went looking for my grandfather, whom I never knew. But the high priests hid him and went to my great-grandmother's home and said, "Your son is okay, but you will never see him again." And on a ship he went the next day, where the high priests in New York City met him and educated him, and then sent him across North America to find conclaves of Syrians and to build churches. Not physically build churches, but build communities. He was a networker, and all of a sudden, it all made sense to me. A few years after, the Abrahams fled Syria for a better life. And before leaving her homeland, my 9-year-old grandmother, Mary Abraham, put her favorite doll under a fig tree. Was it optimism and faith that she would one day return? Was she protecting the doll from the unknown? My father, Michael Joseph Jr., carried on his father's justice-seeking defiance and his mother's faith, optimism, and protective instincts every day of his life. This is what formed that little 6-year-old. He watched his brothers go off to war. We sometimes think how traumatic it must have been for that little boy waiting and wondering if his older brothers would ever return from World War II. 5 years later, when Dad was 12, he lost his father to poor health care. A simple gallbladder, and then operating room pneumonia, and then that 12-year-old boy was crushed. I had a feeling when I gave this eulogy in Marathon, and many people commented, that they didn't know this about my father. He didn't tell this story. He didn't think it was his to tell. When I tried to talk to him later in life, very late in life, like within months of him passing, about what I wanted to say, he would have none of it. "No, Jimmy, you're not going to tell me what you're going to say. Would you like to help me write it?" "No, that's not happening." First time he's ever said he didn't want to write something with me. At some point he was discovered. For his brilliance, for his humor, for his compassionate heart, for his voice, his singing voice. This must have given him strength. His strong, loving mother, his siblings, 5 of whom would become educators, and his teachers all made him feel safe enough to write the following just before the final question on the 1952 New York State Physics Regents exam. I'm wondering if you ever shared this with you, sir. And he wrote, "This is where I go from 98 to 100. And he did. Is that quintessential? Right. He got a full ride to Clarkson at a time when only 6% of the population went to college. When they heard him singing at the local Episcopalian church, they immediately invited him to sing in the Christmas pageant. A year later, his 19-year-old sister, his first best friend, was struck and killed by a car, by a drunk driver after midnight mass. Right? You didn't know this. He wouldn't tell you this. It's not who he was. It's what formed him. What do What impact do centuries of generational trauma have on someone? What kind of sadness and fear is felt by a child who watches his older brothers, his heroes, go off to war? How does one persevere after losing a parent at 12 years old? What does watching your closest sister die, your first best friend die a senseless death, do to your human spirit? Does it make you cynical? Or do you grow up to become a fierce advocate for children, especially the most vulnerable? A voice for the voiceless? Does it create bitterness? Or do you get out of bed every morning, look at life as a gift, and find the most routine? You ever been in a car when you start singing? And find the most mundane things to sing about. Some crazy stuff. Do you learn not to trust? Or do you greet everyone, even strangers, with a joke and a genuine interest in them? Do you dare not love? Well, my sister, my brothers, myself, my mother, he dared to love. In other words, did my father find it deep within himself to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with this God? Dinner time stories were many, but there are three of my favorites. The farmer's valedictorian daughter. One of the most vivid memories. He came home animated because the farmer had just taken a swing at him and he ducked. The farmer's valedictorian daughter wanted to go to college and the father was having none of it. So Dad got in the car, drove to the farm, walked into the barn, and the farmer said, "What the hell are you doing here? What do you want? I understand you and your daughter may not see eye to eye on continuing your education." "Farmer, she'll do just fine staying here working with me." "Dad, shouldn't that be her choice?" Swing duck. Do justice. Do justice. Skipping school. This was actually something that made its way into the comments or the stories that were shared on the website, funeral home website. Mr. Joseph was a fantastic person, as well as the best principal of MCS, and I remember him telling this story. He was an advocate, advisor, and simply a caring person. I remember the one and only time I skipped school and got caught. Mr. Joseph brought us into his office and said, "I don't know why you would skip school, especially lunch period. We have the most delicious lunches here at American."
That changed.
And he looked at him and he said, "Don't do it again, get back to class." Love mercy. Love mercy. A classmate of mine was a Jehovah's Witness. Didn't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Didn't attend birthday parties. And I made fun of that in front of my father. Wrong move. Wrong move. Jimmy, everyone has a right to their own beliefs. All that matters is that they're a good person and treat people with kindness and compassion. Walk humbly with your God.
How did I draw this slide? We're done. That was wonderful, and it was moving, and it was pitch perfect. Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
I had a great teacher.
Yeah, you sure did. You sure did. We had agreed to tell stories, right? And he snuck some very heavy stuff into the storytelling. I want to start, and as I think I must, by acknowledging Jamie and this incredible museum. It's actually several museums sandwiched together. And for those of you who haven't spent a little bit of time here, please do. There's nothing like it in the state of New York. What's occurring here has given me an opportunity to meet this guy and to spend time with him, and I view that as a privilege worthy of a lifetime. Erik Bitterbaum is one of the great presidents of the SUNY system. There are 64 of them, and he's in the front rank, and he's been there for a long time. And so thank you for your service. And my classmate Jeannie Eisenhardt is here, so thanks for coming, Jeannie.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so listen,
You look a hell of a lot older than her.
I know. I've got to do a serious thing here because I think the part that I can play that's different than that which the other panelists can is that I can make the case, or at least I can try to make the case, for something that they can't or wouldn't choose to do. And the case that I intend to make is that Mike Joseph is a consequential figure in the history of New York State education. And in order for me to tell you why, I have got to do a little School Finance 101. So forgive me, because we're going to go wonky, all right, for just a little bit. We finance our schools three ways. The feds have a mountain of regulations and red tape, but they only put about 7% in the pot. So it's a big tail wag the dog proposition. The bulk of school funding comes from two sources. The first is what the state provides, and that is now well south of 40%. I think it's more nearly 36% these days. But what's important about what the state does is that the pot of money that it draws from comes from your state income tax. So the state income tax provides the funds for school aid. And when people talk about school aid, they're talking about a progressive tax that comes from your school tax. So rich districts get less than poor districts, but the differential is not meaningful as far as I'm concerned. The part that most folks don't understand is that the lion's share of funding school education depends upon local wealth. And it doesn't come from an income tax or a use tax. It comes from your real property tax, okay? So in that regard, when you think about it that way, that the bulk of school funding comes as a function of local effort, it helps you understand why there are such stark disparities in the educational experience of young people around this state. If you are fortunate enough to live in a wealthy community, you are going to have good schools. You are going to have good schools, you're going to have a lot of money, you're going to have great teachers, you're going to have a rich curriculum. It's all going to be great. If you are raised in a poor community, and many rural communities qualify for that description, many small cities as well. If you come from those backgrounds, you are fighting an uphill battle from day one. You are always behind the 8 ball because, among other things, you have no tax base. There's no business coming in, or very little. You're losing population, and when you do that, you're losing tax revenue. So there is a struggle, and the theory is that the state aid part of it is going to be sufficient to take care of the disparity. It doesn't. It doesn't begin to. And Mike Joseph, unlike most of his peers, looked at that and said, that's unacceptable, and I'm going to do something about it. Now, he spent how many years in Marathon?
25.
25 years in Marathon. And I'm going to finish I get to make some happier stuff here down the road. I'm going to finish with some Mike stories and a Marie story too.
Okay.
And you won't be happy with a couple of them. So when Mike finished at Marathon,
Glad my mother's not here.
where he was much beloved, he went to the rural schools program at Cornell University. The rural schools program at Cornell University, when Mike Joseph arrived, had 50 schools. There are 450 rural schools in the state of New York. And this organization, while doing very good work, had only succeeded in convincing 50 schools that they ought to put a dime in the pot and support the work. By the time that Mike Joseph left the rural schools program, there were 350.
There's the networker. There's the networker.
And there's a reason why. And the reason is this. Mike, who now qualified as a fully accredited academic, could go on the circuit and make speeches and host forums and do all those sorts of things that academics do. But Mike got to Albany and, as Jim just suggested, couldn't harness his impulse to network. And because he was such a vibrant personality, and because he was such an expert, and because he was able to point out the problem with a passion that was inescapable to the listener, people started to take him seriously. And they started to think differently about the nature of the problem. And pretty soon, he was invited by the leading staffers in the Assembly and in the Senate and in the governor's office and in the state education department to come brief them on what's really occurring in the rural schools. And Mike started to point out things to them like this. I've made myself a little chart here because I wanted to make sure I had the stuff right. When I was serving on the Board of Regents, they would give you a list of the schools that had the highest per pupil expenditure. And so when you started going down this list, you would look for Scarsdale and Bronxville and Great Neck, and they were always there, right? But then there were some anomalies. A school district called Newcomb jumped up, and a school district called Minerva jumped up. And these are little teeny tiny districts in the Adirondacks. Newcomb's got 81 kids in the entire school district, right? Minerva's got 99 kids in this entire school district. Newcomb, based on 2021 data, spends $54,000 per child per year to educate, right? And Minerva spends $42,000, and I won't go through the rest of it. Marathon spends, by the way, $21,000.
Sounds like there's some pretty high, it sounds like lake property.
Yeah, and it's thousands of miles of real estate, right? And so what Mike did was the first thing he put into the heads of these legislative leaders was, you know, we've got a problem out here in the boonies that you folks don't have. We have buses. And our buses travel hundreds of miles every day. And those buses are our lifeline. We've got to go fetch our kids, and we've got to get them to and from school safely. And oh, by the way, we sometimes spend more money on buses and bus drivers than we do on instruction. How do you like them apples, right? Mike didn't like the sound of that. And what he knew was the fact that these districts that had to spend disproportionately on transportation were almost all small rural school districts, and nothing in the state aid formula spoke to that. Nothing, not a word. So Mike said, look, there ought to be something called sparsity aid. And among the categorical aid streams that make up the school aid formula, there's something for virtually everything. But there wasn't anything that recognized the imperative of transportation in rural districts. So Mike sat down with these leaders and they began to brainstorm, and they put together the academic and factual justification for treating this as a real problem that was unique to rural schools, and to let them understand that they could fix it. And I'll be damned, that's exactly what they did. And it was Mike Joseph that did that for the entire state of New York. Not just his district, all of them. And then, on top of that, he got to the point where he said, you know, and there are all sorts of other things that we have to do because we're small and rural, and we haven't got any local wealth. We have to pay for things that aren't paid for elsewhere. We struggle mightily to attract and hold teachers. There are all sorts of things. I'm going to wait until after Erik's done to talk about what Cortland has meant to little places like Marathon. But trust me, in these small districts, you encounter expenses that really don't make a lot of sense for you, but you're required to incur them because the state law says, or some Regents regulation says that you must. All right. So Mike became a champion, and this was in the wake of the CFE case, and you don't need to know what that is, but it's about educational equity. It's about creating a financial system that would support educational equity for all the schools of the state. Mike says we need a foundation. We need a hunk of aid that can't be invaded, that's available to everybody, to give us a fair fight opportunity, a level playing field, an opportunity for our kids to succeed. And he got that done. Now, he had help, and there are many fathers to that whole thing. But it was Michael's whose voice was the most authoritative and credible in the room. And I will be forever grateful to him for that, as should every person in the entire state of New York. and especially those who live up here in the woods. All right, so that's the end of my serious stuff. So, since then, by the way, Mike's been asked to join gubernatorial transition teams, every educational finance discussion forum, consortium that ever existed. I mean, he had to be on the road all the time because he became very much in demand. Mike Joseph was a big damn deal. All right, here come the Mike stories.
Can't wait. So the counselor rests on the argument. You think he was a trial lawyer or something?
So Jeannie will know that my sources here, and they are primarily Gail Ashcroft, Bob Verfus, and Carol Parker, right? And they were 2, 1, and 3 in the class of 1959. I was 6. I did not make the top 10% of my class. And it's been a cross I have borne my entire life. So Gail, for those of you who don't know her, Gail is a force. Strong, outspoken, got vivid ideas and is prepared to act on them. Bob Verfus is a math genius who went off to the Air Force Academy. He was our valedictorian, became a jet pilot, had a good career in the Air Force and came back home. He married Carol, who was 3rd in the class, as I recall. All of them just too smart to talk about. And it was. Everybody in that class was really quite extraordinary. So one of the things that they told me that I did not know was that Mike Joseph was a founder of the Interscholastic Athletic Conference. That he was a huge
Founding member, right?
founding member. Yeah, founding member. And in its Hall of Fame now.
Yes.
In its Hall of Fame.
You and I aren't.
Yeah. Well,
Shut up, Chip.
every organization is entitled to an oversight. So he was also their president. But the reason I wanted to raise it was that here again, this is a hidden hand. You all are likely familiar with Title IX. Title IX created a huge swath of opportunity for young women, and in particular, athletic opportunity. But it's one thing to have opportunity in principle. It's another thing to have it as a real thing. And Mike was held to pay on the subject of creating actual opportunity for young women. And so he went to work in the IAC, and the next time you look in the paper and read the scores about that team of young women who just succeeded in the sectionals in soccer or field hockey or any number of other sports, and you look at them and how much joy they take from those activities, the hand of Michael Joseph is in the back of that too.
Do justice.
Do justice.
We did not rehearse this.
No. So look, he was not perfect. This is not a hagiography. Right. He was. It is said that he had a temper.
Did you learn that at Hamlet or Cornell?
I learned that in Marathon. It is said that he had a temper. Did he have a temper?
He did.
Okay. So I have a temper story.
Well, this is the one I'm not going to like.
No, I can't tell. You'll have to tell me which one.
Very good.
All right.
We have another speaker, by the way.
And he had strong views.
Mhm.
And it was not always easy going to try to change those strong views. Is that fair to say?
I think he was a little stubborn.
And was he a little old school?
In some regards, but actually ahead of his time, as you just suggested. So I wouldn't say he was old school in all matters.
Okay.
So if you got an old school story there, tread gently.
So here's the first one. The first one is Mike, partway through a school day, announced that there was going to be a compulsory faculty meeting at 4 o'clock.
I know the story.
Do you know this story? And Gail had something that she had scheduled, and they didn't know anything about this, but Mike said, "Oh, we gotta have it." So there was a lot of caterwauling, and people were very unhappy, but they all scrambled and changed their plans and went to the meeting. Well, the meeting turned out to be a United Way solicitation, and so Gail was out of her mind. The next morning at 7 o'clock, Gail was seen entering the outer office of Mike's sanctum sanctorum. And she had taken about 2 steps inside the door when Mike's voice came out of his inner office, and the voice said, "Good morning, Gail, I've been expecting you." Which I thought was real, and it gives you a sense of his emotional intelligence too, because he knew where the...
He was a little self-aware.
Yeah. Gail had another burr under her saddle, and that is that there was a dress code for women at Marathon at the time. And they were to wear skirts or dresses. Skirts or dresses. So Gail lobbied against that and was getting nowhere. Then one Christmas, Marie came to the Christmas party in a pantsuit. And that was the end of the prohibition.
That, I did not know that story. I've known every one, but that one will be repeated
Well,
tonight.
how about the one, do you know the one where he walked out on the school board?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is a great one. So he just thought things were not going the way he wanted them to go, and so he decided he would leave. So Bob Verpus, who was the president of the board, chased him out the door and put him in his car, and drove Mike around the village a couple laps. And by the time they finished the second lap, everything was copacetic, and Mike went back and they finished the meeting, and everybody was happy as a clam.
I don't think he was proud of that moment.
I think,
But he was not afraid to share that with his children.
I think,
When he made,
and then I guess,
It would go something like, don't do that. Don't do that here.
so Mike's retirement ceremony. Probably the most meaningful local thing I've ever seen in Marathon. And it was in the gym, and the place was packed to overflowing. And Jim Joseph brought tears to everybody's eyes in his remarks. And they had a lovely program, and then they made the mistake of opening up the floor. And they started to pass the mic around. And Cindy and I were an hour and a half from home. And I think we started at, there was a dinner, and then, all right, at 11:30.
And I had an early flight the next day.
At 11:30, people were still walking up to grab that mic and tell Mike Joseph how much they loved him. And I mean, is there a greater reward in this life than that? That's unbelievable. I'm done.
Let me see. Is it on? Yes, it is. So, first of all, let me ask, how many of you have at least one degree from SUNY Cortland. So that's great. So it's nice to welcome you. And I want to thank Jamie, and I want to thank the panelists for inviting me. I'd make some observations before we get to into the talk. I've always said that in listening to people, it gives you a reflection of who they are. And Jim, I can tell that your father had quite an impression on you. But as you describe him, I think you described yourself. And I think that's very worthy. So I see why you're a dean. You're welcome to come to Cortland someday if we have an opening. But your father would have been very proud. And obviously he was a giant, an extraordinary gentleman. I didn't know. He taught for us at the college. We have a certificate of advanced study. And of course, based on his knowledge, he was welcomed and made a difference. And then when I first arrived here, also, someday we're going to do something like this for Carl, actually. The import that you had within the state is quite extraordinary and should be told as well. So it's now my pleasure, to talk about the college. So as it says here, there are many stories about Cortland. I've been there 21 years, but this is the story about teacher education because of Mike Joseph. So it's our role in educating and supporting teachers, not just in the county or in the region. I don't know if you know this about SUNY Cortland. We are the largest producer of teachers, not only in the state of New York, but in the Northeast. And that's probably 15 or 20 states. And then I think in the nation, we're number 11 in the number of teacher educators that we produce. So we're going to tell the history through a series of slides that Mike Bersani put together for me. And it tells a great story. So we'll go to the first one. Is it up? Okay. So you may not know this about how we came into existence. So right after the Civil War, in 1866, the state of New York provided funding for Albany. Today it's SUNY Albany. And it was such a great success, the state legislature decided we're going to provide more money and we're going to do it in 4 communities. And fortunately, you can see the state only provided $12,000, but believe it or not, the citizens of Cortland, New York produced $100,000. Can you imagine that amount, what that would be today? It'd be in the tens of millions probably. And here they raised this amount of money. And so in 1868, we came into existence. And that picture there is what the original school looked like, the college. It was made of brick and wood. And sadly, in 1919, it burned down. It was down on Church Street. And that's in 1923, they moved up to the hill. So the next slide, please. Now this is one little wrinkle that many people don't know. We could have actually had the College of Agriculture here in Cortland, New York. Because in 1911, we were given the responsibility, the Cortland Normal School, to create a 2-year program for the training of teachers of agriculture. And then someone made the decision in Albany in 1917, no, we're going to give it to Cornell. So now the College of Ag is there. But there's a lot of stuff in our archives that's really fascinating. The number of farmers and the methodology, we developed the curriculum, but sadly it was taken away from us. But that's a little nugget that not many people know, that we could have been the College of Ag. Next slide, please. So in 1927, something that people don't know. First of all, what is a normal school? It's probably a term you've heard frequently. It turns out that there were educators felt that there were norms and that there was a specific curriculum that all schools had. And so that's why they were called normal schools. And they produced primarily our future teachers. We did something very unusual historically. That was to leave the college and to go down to Binghamton. And then we went on to Owego Street. You didn't do that historically. there was no opportunity as a young future teacher to actually go and observe and practice. Cortland was one of the first to do it in the nation, which is really very interesting. And of course, the Wego Street School is no longer the Wego Street School, but you can see it. It still stands there, and I have to smile when I drive by it, because it makes me realize something very historic that the college did. Next slide, please. And then we had this extraordinary woman, as you can see, Ella Van Hosen. Van Hosen or Van Hoosen, you can decide. No one is really sure on the correct Dutch pronunciation. But she developed our campus school. So it was a school for the faculty and the staff and citizens of the community to come, and it was a school of practice. And she was in charge of it for 30 years. And in honor of her, we named a wing of the college of that building, Van Hosen Hall. It was initially in Old Main, and then we had to move it as we grew. Next slide, please. So here's a picture of the normal school in 1942. Quite a number of faculty, staff, and students. And that's when we moved to a 4-year baccalaureate program. The legislature gave additional funds, and what happened is principals became presidents. So I'm the 10th president, but there were 5 principals. And one of the more delightful things that has occurred for me is we have someone on our foundation board, Louise Conley, whose grandfather was the 2nd principal of the college. And her grandparents, great-grandparent, her grandparents grew up on the college, and she has all these wonderful stories that she remembers from her parents. And then, as you can see, pupils were now called students. So I only can figure what that must have been like in that era. But it did start all these different normal schools, Oneonta, Fredonia, Buff State, etc., were invented in essence. And it wasn't until 6 years later, in 1948, that they all came together. And so people often ask me, why is Oneonta and Cortland both the Red Dragons? It'd be like Michigan and Michigan State being the Wolverines. Well, it's very simple. They were all independent normal schools. And as it turns out, an athletic director who left Cortland, who was in PE, and we're very famous for physical education, went to Oneonta, and he didn't like the mascot and convinced the principal they should be Red Dragons. And then, of course, this was in the 1930s. His name was Hal Chase, and they have a building at Oneonta. And they're very disturbed at Oneonta that we were the first Red Dragons, I can assure you. But that's when everything starts to change. And then there was this extraordinary president. His name was Donald Smith. He was there, as you can see, from 1943 to 1959. At that time, we only had 33 acres. I'll show you a picture in a little bit. And we only had about a little over 400 students. During those years, we grew by adding another 100 acres. We went from that one building you'll see in a few minutes to 6 buildings. 6 were under construction and 5 were in development. And we grew to about 2,300. So he had quite an impact on the college. And there's one story where they were actually putting in the parquet floor in Moffett, where Carl actually played basketball. And he was in jeans, and he grew up on a farm, so he knew how to work with his hands. And a student said to him, you know, you're a really handy custodian here. You know how to put in a parquet floor. And he said, well, thank you. Turned out he was the president. That's a true story. But in the late 50s, we started to become liberal arts colleges and moved from our roots as normal schools. And as you can see, next slide, there's the original college. I don't know if you can see that up there, yeah. And you know, it was one building, and the library was there, the swimming pool, everything. And of course, on the right, you can see the college today. It's rather expansive, as you know. I'm going to brag here for a second. So back then, anyone who wanted to go to Cortland could go. We didn't turn anyone away. This year, the fall class that's coming in, for freshmen, we have room for 1,300, and we have over 17,000 applications. So it's become a very difficult place to get into. It's actually, as of Friday, 17,513. And of course, they call my office and they're outraged when their child doesn't get in. There's nothing I can really do. We say, go to one of our 30 community colleges, who will write a contract with your child, do well, and then you have automatic admissions to the college. So we've come a long way. Now, one of the things that we're very proud of is science education. As you can see, in 1947, we started to begin the curriculum where we went from just methods and pedagogy to actually have specificity. And we are, at that time, were recognized for the science teachers we were producing, not only at the elementary level, but we were producing secondary teachers that had real expertise in geology, earth science as we call it, chemistry, biology, and physics. And there was a real shortage of qualified science teachers in the late 40s. And all these GIs who were coming back using the GI Bill, many of them went on into the sciences, and I've met some of them actually. And then this next slide shows science education today. We have a whole building in which that odd-looking thing is a planetarium, if you're curious. And off to the right, we now bring in school children. So those are second graders who are coming into the college to learn to do an experiment, develop a hypothesis. Second graders, you might ask, but that's what's happening today in our marvelous science classrooms. Next slide, please. And then in the 1950s, we were one of the first schools in the state of New York to offer masters. The state education department authorized that we could do this. You can see that the first ones that we offered were elementary, physical education, health education, and of course our rec program. Today we have closer to 75 masters, and some are completely online, like literacy. So you can be anywhere in the world and get a master's from us. And we actually had someone who was graduating with their master's who lived in Oregon, who flew all the way here because he said to his wife, if I'm going to be a graduate of SUNY Cortland, I need to at least be on the campus for a moment. And so he flew in, and he actually was hooded, and he waved. It was during the pandemic, so he was actually filmed, and his wife could see him back in Bend, Oregon is where they were. But in 1950, you can see that we started to grow. Next slide, please. And then we had this marvelous campus school. It was founded in 1963, and the children of faculty, staff, and members of the Cortland community and Homer could come there. And it was an extraordinary education. It produced 4 or 5 college presidents at New Paltz, Carleton, Niagara Community College. People that I've met over the years went to school there. Nebraska Wesleyan, where I actually started my career. His father was a faculty member here at SUNY Cortland. But then we ran into budgetary problems in the late 70s, early 80s. And Dr. Clark, who was the president, who still lives here in the community, is 92, had to close the campus school. Ironically, we are now trying to reopen campus schools. We don't have the resources or the space, but major universities realize what a marvelous concept it is to have that right on the campus. We do have a child care center that I'll show you, and it has cameras, and the cameras have 2 purposes. One, to protect, to know who's going into that building, but it allows our early childhood candidates to actually watch a master teacher work with young children. So this is Van Hosen Hall today, and actually to the right you can see we're putting in a $27 million addition and renovation from the blessings of the state of New York. Next slide, please. And then in 1985, Dr. Clark did something unique. We were one of the first schools that had big education programs. We went to China. He went to China. And it was at the time called Beijing Teachers College. I've actually been there. And we sent students there, and we also received students from China. We still do. And but it's been expanded. We now have another university there called Chufu. It's the home of Confucius. And so it's a great opportunity for our students to learn about our different culture and how they teach, and it's a great opportunity for our Chinese students to come to us. We also, for many years, had a very large program in Australia where we would send over 40 teacher candidates, and we negotiated with the State Department of Education. They could do part of their student teaching and be certified in Australia. We had to close it during the pandemic, and it hasn't reopened. But I used to get lots of complaints because most of our students who went there were women, and they fell in love with an Australian, and they're never coming back. And I actually had a mother call me and said, I'm angry at you because I'm going to have grandchildren in Australia, and that is a long trip to make. So that was one of the peculiarities of our international program. Still going on. We have students who go to England. And so we're very thoughtful when it comes to teacher education and the things that we're doing. Next slide, please. And then in 1993, we opened the Child Care Center, as you can see. And we were very fortunate. Senator Seward knew that we needed to expand it, and he found some significant dollars. And in 2006, we opened the new Child Care Center. And as I said earlier, it allows our students to go in there and work with children up to 4 years of age. And it's a marvelous training opportunity for them in early childhood. Next slide, please. And then here's the Child Care Center today. You can see the playground there in the foreground. And this is a funny story for me. I sometimes go down there and I walk, and the students look at me and they say, someone says, who is that? These little guys. And they say, oh, that's the principal. And so I really like that. I think that's great. The next slide, please. And then in 1998, Dr. Taylor, who was the president, wrote a grant to the Ford Foundation, and this has had a profound change on the state of New York. We started the CURE program, which stands for the Cortland Urban Recruitment of Educators. And the way this works is it's a grant. It helps pay for the education of our students. Most of them come out of the inner cities of New York, Albany, Buffalo, Rochester, etc. And they make a moral commitment, an ethical commitment, that they're going to go back into the inner city where they came from to teach. It turns out these are under-resourced schools. They have really difficult issues. The schools are falling apart. And these are students that are really zealots that want to go back. And so CURE, we produce students every year that will be graduating next week, and they'll have 15 to 20 offers from school principals because they are so amazing when they come out. The thing that's also interesting, this program goes back when I started 21 years ago, and 90% of them have stayed in the inner city. They could easily leave and go to a Scarsdale or a Bronxville, and they've chosen not to. They've chosen to do the great fight, which is really very exciting. And then this next slide, the last slide is, well, almost the last slide, is I actually established the School of Education. So it was kind of, we had two schools, professional studies and education. I thought it was important to break it out so that each would have their own identity. And it really has helped us tremendously. And as you can see, we have the departments of childhood and early childhood, foundations, social advocacy, and literacy. And my great joy is that when I travel in the state of New York, and so I say I'm from Cortland, they say, oh, you produce great teachers. If I want a teacher, that's where I want my child to go. And also, of course, physical educators. I would argue all our degrees are great. I'm a biologist, so I think my biology department's great, and I teach there. But truly, we are golden when it comes to producing teachers. You know you're going to get a great teacher. And then in 2009, based on our tradition in science education, as you can see, we got a grant from the National Science Foundation for $900,000 to support scholarships for future K-12 mathematics and science teachers, just because of our excellence. And then in 2018, there was a survey of colleges and universities across the nation. There are about 8,000 colleges and universities. About half of them are four-year colleges. So think of 4,000 colleges. Who produces the best teachers in the nation? Who are the top 100? Well, we were in the top 50. Actually, we're in the top 25, as you can see. We're number 23 nationally, so that's a high honor of our, and then we're considered a best value. I don't know how many of you read the New York Times, but this fall there are 6 colleges in this country that'll be going over $90,000 a year, and many more that are in the 80s and 70s. You can get an education at any SUNY for $24,000. That's everything, the whole ball of wax, whether you go to Stony Brook, or you go to Cortland, or you go to Binghamton, or you go to Buff State. It's a great gift that your tax dollars, as Carl has pointed out, are underwriting our costs. It's a great gift that the citizens of New York give to the next generation. And then lastly, providing new pathways in 2024. We just recently received a $2 million grant from the state of New York to help. We have a dearth of teachers. We need more. And so we received this grant from the state of New York to help people who want to become teachers. If you are in any profession, you can actually come to Cortland and go and work while you're working. Go summer, academic year, summer at night, and you can come out certified and work in our schools. And so we hope that is a great story. So in the story of teacher education, Cortland, I think, is a very special institution and quite unique. And it's been my pleasure to at least tell part of that story. So thank you.
I want to add a postscript to that. Jeannie and I and the others of our era were the beneficiaries of two things. One, the proximity of Cortland and the wonderful teachers that came out of Cortland because they constituted the bulk of our faculty. And the other thing, and this is ironic and sad, we were the beneficiaries of discrimination against women. And that sounds counterintuitive, but if you remember back to that time in our country's history, the opportunities for women were limited. There were not many things they were allowed to do. And one of them was they could teach. And so these very gifted, very brilliant women went into teaching, many of them because it was what they dreamt of doing their whole lives, but some of them because they simply were not allowed access to other things that interested them. So I bless Cortland and what it represents for creating the prospect of real opportunity for people like Jeannie Eisenhart and myself. Thank you.
Great point.
I guess if you have any questions, we would be happy to answer any questions you might have. I always do that in class. Before I leave, I always try to leave some time. Otherwise, I guess we go and get some refreshments.
Yes.
It's wonderful. Thank you for coming.